Hey everybody, so we are continuing to look at vocabulary instruction. I don't actually have a lot extra for you guys this week. I really want you focusing on reading those strategies and contacting me if you have questions about those strategies. I'm going to hit some really high level stuff, go back again and review the assignments that we still have ongoing for this module, but I don't have a ton. So we're in week 6, which is the second week of this module. As you can see if I can get this working here. Here we go, as you can see right here. And you need to be doing this additional reading if you haven't already. A lot of this is going to start moving away from some maybe a bit more disconnected ideas about just in general what's good for vocabulary instruction, and start looking at some concrete strategies that you could be bringing into a classroom tomorrow. Obviously you still need to listen to the rest of this. Make sure you get on that second learning journal, which I'll explain at the end of, or close to the end of this commentary. Get back in there and do your replies. Remember, reply more than once across different days to get full credit. And get to the serious work on your project, which I'll go over one more time in this module, in this commentary. I want to start by taking this opportunity for this slide and the next slide. We're going to talk about two major ways that you're going to see a lot of folks framing what we know about learning to read and reading development. And this one is called The Simple View of Reading, so it's a great place to start. What's important to remember about all of these frameworks is that they are used to describe what we have observed and measured about people learning to read. They are not meant to eliminate the possibility of other factors coming into play, but they are just meant to explicate some really big ideas of what we know. So in this case, very simple ideas. So we see reading comprehension, which is our main goal. We need to be able to comprehend what we're reading so that we can do something. Purpose is huge. We have purpose for reading. In particular, in secondary, we increasingly are using reading to do something else. Like we are reading through instructions to be able to complete a lab. We are reading historical documents to be able to have a discussion on important historical events. We are reading through explanations of mathematical concepts and computations and formulas so that we can solve problems, and so on and so forth. So we need to be able to understand what we read. And it can kind of be separated into two parts as to whether you're going to successfully comprehend what you read. So the first is word recognition, and then there's language comprehension. I wish this graphic kind of had them flopped because they come flopped. We talked earlier about how oral language is the #1 defining characteristic of whether you're going to be able to understand what you read. No matter how well you can say a word out loud, if that word isn't part of your oral language already, you're not going to understand what it means, and so you're not going to understand what you read. So first, you have to know what the word is beyond the page, outside of the page. Like, I know what the word simple means, and I knew what the word simple meant before I was ever able to read the word simple. But this is still a very useful graphic to help us understand. So we can, at its core, the simple view of reading is just these boxes. Word recognition times language comprehension equals reading comprehension. For my math folks out here, this operator is actually important because this is not an additive process. It doesn't matter how much is in your oral language. If you cannot decode words, you cannot understand what you read. And vice versa. It doesn't matter how good you are at decoding. If your oral language knowledge is really lacking, you're not going to be able to understand what you read either. Word recognition is not something we focus on a lot in this course. It's something that does get focused on a lot more in the primary grades. And one of the reasons for that is that word recognition, to a certain extent, is a finite skill. That means that you can learn all there is to learn about it and be done, right? There's 26 letters in the alphabet. Once you learn them all, you've learned them all. There are debatably 44 to 46 phonemes in the English language. Once you learn what they are and how to associate them with the letters written on the page, as complex as that process is because English is weird, see the videos from last week for some fun about that, you stop. You can be done learning phonics. There is a point where you are done learning phonics. But there isn't really a point where you are done learning language and how to use language. That just keeps growing and growing and refining, and that is what allows reading comprehension to keep growing and growing and refining. No matter how old you are or how skilled of a reader you are, there's more. So it's not additive, it is multiplicative. And the next view that we're going to look at, the next way of thinking about it, will tangle this apart even further. And now my mouse doesn't want to work, so I'm going to have to switch to, nope, my mouse just doesn't want to work. Oh, there it is. Sorry about that. So this is Scarborough's reading rope. It probably looks, if you look very carefully at it, you're like, this isn't actually any different. We have word recognition and language comprehension, and that leads to reading comprehension. So it's the same, but it's breaking them down into some component parts and also adding a little perspective about why those differences matter and how our fluency and facility with these different skills changes the way that we read. So word recognition becomes increasingly automatic. We stop having to sound out words. We stop having to think about the individual letters and phonemes. We become very adept at recognizing words by sight. Though the data isn't super conclusive, there's some evidence to show that there are words that move. And by the way, I'm speaking 100% about English language. The data and studies on other languages is different because those languages are created differently and your brain adapts differently to comprehend them. In particular, languages that are non-alphabetic in their base have very different processes for being read. So let me say that first. But there is some evidence that as we become more fluent readers, there are words and types of words where we literally change where we access the information in our brain, like what part of our brain lights up, and it becomes more visual. We do read letter by letter or chunk by chunk, and slowly over time, certain words, we don't look at letter by letter again anymore. We just see the whole word, we know what the whole word means, and we move on. That's still inconclusive, but that's the general understanding of sight recognition. Now, that becomes increasingly automatic, and we think about it less. However, language comprehension becomes increasingly strategic, and we think about it more. So we think about vocabulary and what words mean or could mean more. We think about what we know about print and genre and how text is used more, and becomes a bigger part of our thought process while we read and become skilled readers. So this becomes increasingly fluent and uses less of our cognitive load. This becomes increasingly complex and strategic and becomes more of our cognitive load over time. And as far as cognitive load goes, I can't remember if I've talked about this already, but let's use my cup and my straw example because this is my favorite example. When we're talking about cognitive load, let's imagine that all the knowledge that you have in your brain is inside this cup, but you can't access it all at once. You have to use a straw to get it out. So your cognitive load is determined not by the size of your knowledge, not by the amount in the cup. It's determined by the straw, because that's as much as you can get out at any one time. And so when we're thinking about cognitive load, we're thinking about decreasing how much has to come up through the straw, how much we actively have to think about in order to comprehend. So that's my very, very plain example. If for those of you who know computers, we're talking about the difference between like RAM and ROM. There's a difference between your processing power and your memory in your computer. Same thing with ours. Our processing power is cognitive load. It's different from what we have available to us if we could access everything that we know about the world simultaneously. We can't do that. So, okay, I think I described that enough. Moving on. Once again, losing my cursor. Ooh, okay, fair warning, I am on take like 6 of this slide because I keep talking on a million tangents, so I'm gonna try and keep it real simple. And if you guys are interested, I'm happy to talk more about it. So first of all, the quote, it's one of my favorite quotes, or it's a paraphrase really, but it's that language is the process through which experience becomes knowledge. So all words in every language that we're aware of, every single word that was invented to share an experience, to communicate something about an experience to another person. And that experience-based genesis for language is really important to what we know about high-quality vocabulary instruction. We know that it needs to, in some way, be connected to experience to be really effective, because that's the purpose of language to begin with. So when you remove language from its intended purpose, it gets really difficult to learn it. So keep that in mind as you're reading through all different kinds of strategies this week. And also, a positive is that if you devote time in your classroom to evidence-based vocabulary instruction, you will increase your students' content knowledge acquisition. Across demographics, studies have shown that. There are a lot of studies, and just some examples of the various demographics. Students without disabilities were studied versus students with disabilities, low SES to high SES, English language learners with native English speakers. So many different groups have been compared on this metric, and language vocabulary instruction increases content knowledge acquisition because language is what makes knowledge. So you have to know the language to get to the knowledge. Something else I want to highlight is the in this bachelor right here, which is up on Canvas, you will or have already read about, let me see if I can get this. What does it mean to know a word? This section is where this is going to talk about these different levels of knowing a word, so I'm not going to get too into that. You can go ahead and read it in the chapter, but I wanted to give you a sort of a companion way to think about word learning progression that comes from a different book, which is this one. You don't have to read this one, but this is where it's coming from, Choice Words. And that is looking at our understanding of a word as starting at a noticing and naming phase. That's the what's that. That's the being able to, like, this is a phone, and this is a book. I could even get deeper and like give the actual name of the book. I could talk about what kind of book it is, but I'm still just naming a thing. And then there is expanding and experimenting with a word. That's when you start using a word, but sometimes you're not using it correctly. You might not know all of the circumstances in which the word would be appropriate to use, or how it might need to be modified to use it appropriately. Let's see, what's a good example of that? A good example of that is like little kids when they're learning verb tenses will use them incorrectly but it's them learning the rule. So first they learn, okay, some words we add ed to when we're talking about things in the past, and so then they'll add ed to every verb and sometimes nouns because they want to talk about something that happened in the past. They're experimenting with it, and by the way that you react to how they've used the words is whether they know whether that word has been used correctly or not. So, and I'm couching this in terms of kids because these phases are important outside of that younger age as well. So you need to be able to notice and name the word. You need to know what the word could mean. And then you need opportunities to experiment with it, to use it, have incorrectly used it, but not feel like you can't. When a little kid uses a word wrong, they're gently corrected through a variety of ways, but we don't give them points and punish them for using words incorrectly, typically. And so we need that aspect of the phase to exist somewhere as well. And then you get into a lovely gatekeeping phase where you know exactly how the word is supposed to be used and it can't be used in any other way. And it's irritating if you hear people using it incorrectly. After that comes another cycle of feeling like you can create and recreate, but now you're doing it from a place of increased knowledge about the word, what it means, and how it's supposed to be used. And so when you use it, you can use it sort of purposefully defiantly. One very simple way that we do this that everybody does at some point is when you start using words sarcastically. That is one way to create and recreate the way a word is meant to be used. And we see this linguistically happen in cycles, both individually and then large trends throughout time. Word meanings shift and change because of this creation and recreation of what words mean. That's true of slang, but it's also just true of words that we wouldn't consider slang, words that we would consider average everyday use words. I'm trying to think of a really great example. If I think of one, I'll bring it up on a different slide. So you're going to be looking at a lot of strategies this week, and I have thrown a couple up here. Some of them might be described in your readings. I think a couple of them aren't, which is one of the reasons why I threw them up here. But more so than me trying to provide you instruction in these strategies here right now, what I am encouraging you to do is create some set of notes for yourself. When you're reading, if I haven't said it before, you should always be doing some kind of interaction with the text beyond translating words into meaning. Like you should be engaging in annotation, you should be engaging in note-taking, however that looks for you and however that works best for you. This is one suggestion of how to, because you're reading about a lot of strategies, to maybe bring some thoughts together so that you can quickly reference it later if you need it. And that is creating some kind of table or notes where you have the strategy, the instructional strategy, the instructional practice, just a quick explanation of what it is and maybe why it works, so that for later work and when you're trying to plan in your actual classroom someday, you have a go-to list that doesn't require you pulling up 5 different articles and 3 different chapters in books, and it's just a quick, easy go-to. I guess maybe I would also, if I was going to do this again, might have added a column for where I read about it so I could get more detail on it. But here's a few. The graffiti word wall and the picture word wall, that's just a way to, there's different types of word walls, and word walls are really great. We see them a lot in elementary, but the evidence is there that they're useful in secondary, that we decrease the environmental print around students in the upper grades to their detriment. Like, there's a lot of benefit in having the words remain for ongoing review. You'll notice I put that as a why it works for both of those, because they're there and you can see it. We also tend to remove image from word learning as we get into secondary situations. Don't do that. Image is huge. We are an incredibly visual people. And so being able to tie meaning and image, hugely important. Remember, that's one of the things that happens in our brain as we get to know words better. They become sight words. That means that we recognize them visually. So understanding something visually activates a different part of our brain. If we can activate more than one part of our brain while we're learning, we are on the right track. So word walls, love them. Freyer models, these are really classic. Everybody does them, but they're classic for a reason. They do work. There's a lot of nuances that you can add to a Freyer model. It's just a way to organize information about a vocabulary word. One of the big benefits of this is that when you use them, you should use them consistently. Don't just do the Freyer model once a year and then it's never brought up again. If you want to do Freyer models, do them a lot. Have kids build notebooks full of Freyer modeled words so that they can reflect on the vocabulary that they're learning. Freyer models, the best version of a Freyer model also includes a visual scaffold. So on those organizers, usually you see the definitions of the word, something about the characteristics of how it's used, or, you know, is it a noun? Is it meant for describing some specific thing? Is it an adjective? Like all those things. Providing an example, a non-example, and an image. That's the typical elements. Don't sleep on dramatic role play. This is another thing that we start to abandon in the upper grades, other than drama. I know I have a theater teacher in here, but other than drama, a lot of times this gets abandoned, and that's a darn shame, because language is how we commit experience to knowledge. So if we tie word learning into experience, even pseudo experience, even structured, made up, pretend experiences, that can really help us. So creating some kind of dramatic scene or song or something that uses specific vocabulary in a context, that's going to increase students' ability to not just remember the word, that naming stage, but feel like they know more about how to use it and when it's appropriate to use it. So for example, in history, having students act out a scene between two characters. Doesn't have to be something that really happened, but acting out a scene between two characters that helps convey the meaning of the words because they've been contextualized into this meaningful experience. Morphological instruction is huge, 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 huge. Again, that's nothing new, but it is extremely powerful and useful. If you didn't watch some of the fun extra stuff last week, then you might not be as aware. If you did, I'm just already going over things you know. But English as a language is crazy. It is a treasure trove. That's not the word I want. A time capsule. It's a time capsule of all the ways we have created and recreated the meanings of words, and the layers of meaning have shifted around and changed so much that it can be difficult to associate our spoken language with our written language sometimes. The more we know about word meaning parts, and the more we know about etymology, which is the history of words, the better positioned we are to continue to increase our vocabularies and use those increased vocabularies effectively. Use it or lose it, that's a real thing. And so we want students to be using these words and understanding them at higher and higher levels. Okay, soapbox done. On to the next. I'm realizing that I said I didn't have a lot this week, and here we are, 20 minutes in. So very quickly, now we're just going through things I've already gone through for the most part. Just want to remind you guys, Words Matter project, make sure you're working on it. Quick reminder of what you're supposed to do. Make sure you watch that vocabulary instruction video if you haven't already. Create your vocabulary planning chart. Use the activities from last week to help you with this. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Go get those words that we were using in the corpus of English and use that information to help you build this chart. So much of that information is already just sitting right there, ready for you to use if you have it. And then, time to think about an instructional strategy. There are a lot of them out there. And what we've known from research, I talked about how research consistently shows that targeted vocabulary instruction increases content knowledge acquisition. But that's true of a variety of strategies. This is less about one or two strategies that are the best and they work all the time, and more about having a toolbox of strategies that you systematically and consistently use with students to increase their word knowledge. And now for the learning journal. So, in your learning journal for week 6, please respond to the following prompts. When you encounter words in casual reading that you do not know, what word solving strategies do you use or not use? Like when you are just reading, and it doesn't have to be novel reading, it could be any kind of reading still. The distinction I'm trying to make here is with the second prompt, which is what happens when you encounter words in your discipline that you don't know. So when you are reading something specific to your field and you encounter a word you don't know, what word solving strategies do you do? How do they compare? So that's your learning journal, and that's all I have for you this week. If you have questions, let me know, and I look forward to seeing what you guys are thinking and how you guys are pulling together all of those strategies to start planning, tentatively planning things around word instruction, around reading instruction that fit your content areas.